All right, Shabbat Shalom, Mashpaka Yasha here. First off, Hallelujah Mahawad, Bashama Mashak Yashai, Bashama Kadash. Double honors to the elders of GMS I learned this truth from, and peace and salutations to the brothers out there doing the work in truth and sincerity. Okay, so like I said, it's the Sabbath right now, and I'm just doing a little lesson. I came across this video, and it was the comments that got me. I had to kind of like speak on this, right? Because I'll play the video and I'll go straight to the comments right afterwards, right? So it's saying this is Harlem in 1939, right? And it goes on to say proof that what plagues inner cities today is not systemic racism or poverty, it is culture and behavior. Now, this is what the devil does, right? He will do shit like I think I know I've made videos on this before. You know, this layered deviance, this layer, like he's got layers of wickedness, right? And he'll go back to a previous layer, to a time, you know, when he was doing wickedness, but it wasn't so bad. And he'll say, oh, look, you see, things were so much better back then. It's not racism that's the problem. It's their behavior that's the problem, right? This is 1939. What was going on during 1939? Huh? What was happening during 1939? Like, it was the southern, it was like towards the end of the southern flight, where the Klan was chasing black people out of the South. Sundown towns were chasing black people out of their entire towns that they then just took over, okay, and stole that land. I've done videos on sundown towns before. You can look that up if you want to, right? And they would flee to the cities. Why? It was deliberate. They were chasing them to the cities so that they could have cheap labor to run in the factory, to work in the factories. That's why you had black people going to the cities. Before, we were all rural. They were like all farming. Majority of them anyway. Right? You ever hear like in New Orleans, the deliberate, let's look it up real quick. The deliberate breaking of the levees to flood the ninth ward or the lower wards. So you had black people fleeing there, running to Chicago, to New York, to Detroit, right, to find a better place to live. It's crazy. Like, you know, that's what they do. They will do things. Oh, and this is what, 1939. So it was just the start of Germany doing their business, you know, like starting World War II or whatnot. You know what would happen right after World War II? They had the VA loans, right? They had home loans for veterans. And you know what the government did? This is why it's systemic, because it's in the system. They would deny black GIs and brown GIs. As a matter of fact, not even just World War II. They did it in World War I. They did it during the Indian Wars. I'm watching a show right now called The English. And one of the characters on there is a scout, right? He's a Pawnee scout, a Gadite, and he goes, he did his service or whatnot, so he's leaving, and he was basically talking to one of the other soldiers, one of the white soldiers, and he was like, "Yeah, I'm just gonna go get some land," and he's like, the soldier's like, "It ain't your land no more," and he's like, I don't want all of it, I just want a piece of it. And the guy, you see if I can find that, man, because it's so powerful, dude. Like, it's not even funny. Um, English, all right, English TV show. I think it's on Netflix. It's called The English. No, it's not. It's not on Netflix. It's on Amazon. My bad. He just says he just wants a piece of the land. Here, where is it? The English. Here it is. It's this one. Yeah, it's this one, and it's a pretty good show. I'm not going to lie, man. Like it's a lot of historical accuracy because they had Indians helping the Americans track other Indians, right, to kill them or whatnot. It's basically showing like the conflict that they had having to do that, but they weren't just doing it because they were wicked or whatnot. Even though he does say, and this is kind of cool too, that he was like, "Yeah, we had enemies with the Indians before you showed up, right? We were just basically picking one side because they were our historical enemies." But he didn't know. And then he goes on to say something like, "We didn't know that you would basically you'd be taking everything," because that's what they did, right? And they will go back and they will say, "Oh, we didn't do anything wrong," right? Because they were fighting and killing each other before we got here, right? It is so diabolical, man. It's not even funny. Like, let's look up this real quick. Where is it? Racism in New York. There was a program, right? There was a program in New York of what, like, I forget what it was called. It was like something like the Great Leave Them Alone. Like, it was basically the government in New York had a policy of not doing anything in the black neighborhoods, just leaving them alone. No civil services. They were paying taxes, right? They were paying taxes, but no civil services, no nothing. Let me see it. I'm gonna find it. New York government policy of leaving black communities alone. They have these damn man. I mean, I won't even go into the whole redlining district, but New York policy of ignoring black communities. There we go. Introduction. Copies background interchangeably. And this looks like a decent article here. In 1845, the term manifest destiny emerged to describe the commonly held belief that white settlement and expansion across North America was inevitable and even divinely ordained, which is true. It is. It is absolutely divinely ordained. This is what God told them to do, right? And they did it, and that's why they said that. But long before then, this ideology proved the justification of ethnic cleansing and systematic displacement. In many ways, it continues to inform policy to this day. And this is in 1845, right? Remember what I said before about the black flight from the South? It was because of this. After the Civil War, the South didn't want free blacks just hankering around or whatnot. So they implemented the oh my God, why is stupid? Can't remember. They implemented these rules, these laws that basically put blacks back in slavery. Like one of them was the prison one. Like if you were arrested and convicted, you could serve bondage. And I had an article that I had read before where it was talking about how they would just arrest people. They would just arrest black men and throw them in jail so that they could go back in bondage, right? And then they had also the apprenticeship system where they could come through and be like, hey, give me your kid, right? Give me your kid and we'll take care of him, and we'll teach him a trade or whatnot. He just has to work for us for free, but we'll feed him and whatnot. And oftentimes that's not what happened. Of course, they just took the kid, did whatever they wanted, abused them in every single way possible, and they still got the free labor from them or whatnot, right? Although American public policies had intentionally displaced people of color for centuries prior, two of the most well-known examples, the Indian Removal Act and the Dawes Act, okay? Authorizing federal government to forcibly relocate Native Americans in the southeast in order to make room for white settlement, right? And that's where the show it takes place during this time, the English that I was just telling you about, right? And it's a you guys really should check that out. It's really solid. All right. And then he goes on, between 1945 and 68, federal laws terminated more than 100 tribal nations' recognition and placed them under state jurisdiction. So, this is the video. It's a little snapshot, of a time in history, right, where it was pretty bad back then, right? But they're like, oh, it was so much better than it is now, not looking at how the actions that took place back then have been steadily building what's happening now and what will continue to happen, until the Heavenly Father steps in and says, enough, and rises up his elect to basically make all of this right again, all right, which is going to be epic. All right, let's go on to see here. Here we go. While Native Americans have long been the primary target of government-sponsored land redistribution, other communities of color, especially black communities, have experienced and continue to experience displacement as well. For black communities in urban areas, public policies have often been enacted under the guise of creating new public spaces, combating urban blight, or bolstering economic development. But over time, these policies have stripped black communities of the wealth and financial stability found in property ownership and affordable rental housing. For example, in the early 1850s, this is what, 50 plus 30 plus 40, that's 90 years before that video, New York lawmakers used eminent domain to destroy a thriving, predominantly black community in Manhattan. Now, you might be saying like, oh, well, I mean, that's, they do that all the time. What would happen to that community had it been allowed to continue to thrive, right? And this is 1850. You had Greenwood was in the 1920s, right? So imagine if you had this community in Manhattan still doing that for the 1920s. That's 50 plus 20. That's 70 years, right? I mean, the deliberate destruction of communities of Jakes, right? Native Americans and so-called Native Americans and so-called blacks, right? Stripping them of the wealth that community would, and the shelter that community would build. Not just shelter like from the elements, but shelter from the discrimination and the hatred around them. And not to mention the psychological damage that creates, the lack of stability that it fosters. You have any idea what happens when children, when families lose their homes, families with children lose homes, even like an eviction? That it makes the children grow up unable to create lifelong bonds. It's hell. It's living hell, and it's man. All right. Displacing thousands of residents in order to create the public space known today as Central Park. And just 30 years ago, Atlanta lawmakers demolished the United States' oldest federally subsidized affordable housing project, displacing more than 30,000 predominantly black families to create Centennial Olympic Park. Ooh, I remember that. That was rough. And they did similar in New Orleans after Katrina. They used eminent domain to destroy a huge swath of the black community there to make like a new, like something similar to Centennial Olympic Park, right? And you know who that was basically catering to? People with the resources to purchase those homes. It's messed up, man. And you know these neo white supremacists, right? Neo Edomite supremacists. They come through and they will do stuff like that, preying on the ignorance, because we don't teach our children anymore, because we can't, because we don't have communities, right? Without a community, you don't have a school, right? Without school, you can't impart your history onto your people. You have families that know, and they will teach their children that. But if you're coming from a community that was just destroyed by the dominant group in the community, you're looking at your family like, yo, you didn't even fight. You didn't do anything. So why am I going to listen to you? I'm telling you, the psychological damage of what it was done and is being done is so damning. That's why the scripture talks about this fight being a fight of the mind, right? It's a spiritual battle. Where do spiritual battles take place? Huh? Where were the spiritual battles Yahushua was fighting when he was on the mountaintop, when he was being tempted of the devil? You think that was the devil was actually standing there next to him? Huh? It's in your head. It's in the mind. In your heavens. There are several definitions for heaven. One is outer space. One is the sky. One is when you're in leadership, in rulership, right? Your heavens. It's... all right. There are just two examples of the countless policies. These are just two examples of the countless policies that have displaced black communities for so-called benefit of the greater population. But there is scant evidence that black Americans see long-term benefits from these revitalization efforts. For much of the 20th century, federal and local policies subsidized the development of prosperous white suburbs in metropolitan areas across the country. They also constructed new highway systems, often through communities. That was also another thing that they did. They did that here in Miami, right? They did that here in Miami. Overtown and Opelika. No, it was just Overtown. Overtown and I forget the name of the other one. It's not Opelika. But they ran I-95 right through it. Obliterated that whole community. And then they have the nerve to fix their friggin' faces and talk about how black people don't build any communities. Yeah, because every time they do, right, the Edomite supremacists come through and destroy it deliberately. It's deliberate, right? All right. And this is also that their future generations can say, oh, see, we've given them opportunities to do so much and they still don't do anything. It's wickedness, right? And then, once it's been destroyed, Jake here is like, yo, why do I even bother trying again? Like I said, it's the psychological effects of it that are the most damning. Why bother trying again if it's the psychological effects of it that are the most damning and long term, because you actually carry that down. You actually hand that down to your children. It's crazy, man. It's really, really wicked, really wicked. And a lot of these liberals will be talking about they walking through the neighborhoods in Black Lives Matter protests, right? All they're doing is just basically, it's an open house. They're just scoping out the neighborhood. As soon as the protest is over, they're coming through, buying up buildings, fixing them up, kicking out the people, raising the rents, kicking out the people, and bringing in their friends. It's all a plan. It's all right. Over the past 50 years, Merriam-Webster defines the gentrification as the process of repairing and rebuilding homes and businesses in a deteriorating area, accompanied by an influx of middle-class or affluent people, and that often results in the displacement of earlier, usually poorer residents. That's a sanitized way of saying it. Over the past 50 years, this process, which sometimes involves government investment, has taken root in dozens of cities across the country. The shooting of Breonna Taylor was a result of this. The mayor of the city has a developer friend, and it was in the news. They basically told this. I'm not making this up. Breonna Taylor's death was a result of them trying to clear her neighborhood of the residents so that the mayor's developer friend come in and gentrify that area. That's why she's dead. Gentrification, right? Increasing demand for housing along with reduced levels of housing production has contributed to staggering increases in rental and purchase price in urban areas across the United States. Oh, here we go. This is a nice one. Black residents declined from 71% of the city's population, Washington, D.C., to just 48%. The city's white population increased by 25% during the same period. And then, so what builds up a community is, of course, resources. And where do they get the money to, if they're going into a gentrifying area, where do they get the money to do that? From banks. We just heard the case a couple days ago, actually, where Wells Fargo was found guilty of denying black applicants. Some of black applicants who made over $100,000 were denied mortgage loans, right, at a rate of something like 3-to-1 to white applicants who were making like sub 60,000. That's why it's systemic, and this is not a new thing. If you remember that show, where they were it was the scene where the bank managers were talking about how they're going to be lending money to black residents at these ridiculous interest rates, and the guy was like, "What? They'll never accept that. No one would ever be able to get out from under that." And the guy was like, "Yeah, that's the plan." And then they default. We get the house, we get the money that they paid, and we do it again, right? It's systemic because it is in the system. All right, so let's go on. In 1933 and 1934, in the midst of the Great Depression, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt signed the Home Owners Loan Act and the National Housing Act into law to prevent foreclosures, to make rental housing and home ownership more affordable. To carry out these missions, the newly minted Home Owners Loan Corporation created maps to assess the risk of mortgage refinancing and set new standards for federal underwriting. The Federal Housing Administration, FHA, used these maps to determine the areas in which it would guarantee mortgages. But the HOLC maps assess risk in part based on a neighborhood's racial composition, designating predominantly non-white neighborhoods as hazardous and coloring these areas red. The process known as redlining denied people of color, especially black people, access to mortgage refinancing and federal underwriting opportunities, while perpetuating the notion that residents of color were financially risky and a threat to local property values. As a result, just 2% of the $120 billion in FHA loans distributed between 1934 and 1962 were given to non-white families. 2%. So that's what? So that's like 2.4 billion of 120 billion. It's fucking bullshit, right? And this is, this is what, 5 years after this was started. That video clip you saw was 1939. 1939. All right. Today, approximately 3 in 4 neighborhoods, 74%, that the HOLC deemed hazardous in the 1930s remain low to moderate income because there is no funding. You can't fix up your neighborhood. You can't, because you don't have the same access to funding that the other side does. It's deliberate. It's systemic. And that photograph here, the video clip that we saw, those people were not, majority of them did not own the homes that in that community that they were living. Right? They were renting, usually at some ridiculously high rates. Oh, all right. Deemed hazardous in the 1930s remain low to moderate income, and more than 60% are predominantly non-white. In short, while federal intervention and investment has helped expand homeownership and affordable housing for countless white families, it has undermined wealth building in black communities on purpose. The U.S. military was basically the ones who said that, who didn't want that, because especially during this time, there was a fear that black people were supporting Nazism. Yeah, and actually just had a video on this where the guy, what's his name? There's a great big band leader. And he was basically a spy for the military, for military intelligence in the black communities. He would show up at the rallies and report on who was speaking, telling the military to deny passports to these people, round them up, etc. It's systemic because it's not just like it's not no damn hillbilly with a hood on, right? It's Supreme Court justices, it's military leaders, it's corporate leaders, and it's ongoing today. All right. In 1944, Roosevelt signed into law the Servicemen's Readjustment Act, commonly referred to as the GI Bill, which provided a range of benefits such as guaranteed mortgages to veterans of World War II. However, according to historian Ira Katznelson, the law was deliberately designed to accommodate Jim Crow. That's the law I was trying to remember. The laws that the Southerners created to basically re-enslave black people after their defeat in the Civil War. Jim Crow laws, right? So the GI Bill was made to accommodate Jim Crow. For instance, the GI Bill allowed local banks to discriminate against black veterans and deny them home loans even though the federal government would guarantee their mortgages. In Mississippi, just 2 of the 3,000 mortgages that the Veterans Administration guaranteed in 1947 went to African Americans, despite the fact that African Americans constituted half of the state's population. While the GI Bill paved the way for millions of predominantly white veterans to enter the middle class, it also further entrenched the United States racial hierarchy. Systemic, it's systemic. And those people in Mississippi, they would build towns, and those towns would be taken over by the Klansmen, who would chase them out using the sundown rule. You get out of town by sundown. If not, we're not responsible for your safety. And the sheriff would be involved, the judge would be involved, everybody would be involved in it. If they didn't leave, they would get burnt down, their homes would be burnt down, they would be murdered. Not killed, murdered, because that's what it was. All right. Okay. That's pretty much it. Yeah, the Fair Housing Act, all of that stuff, they don't really help much. It's there, but they don't really help much because, like I said, it's now a psychological issue. A lot of black and brown people just don't trust the system, and a lot of them just check out. They're just like, "Yo, why am I even trying?" And they check out, which is what the government wants. They want you to just check out and just give up. Never fucking give up, man. Sorry for my language, but never give up. Your job should be to frustrate the devil, right? And you frustrate him by succeeding where he wants you to fail. You understand? You can't be afraid in this thing. The scripture talks about love. What is it? You can't be afraid. Fear is not made perfect in love. Fear perfect in love. There is no fear. This is 1 John 4:18. There is no fear in love, but perfect love casteth out fear, because fear hath torment. He that feareth is not made perfect in love. Right? And what is the perfect in love talking about? Perfection, when it talks about be ye perfect like your Father in heaven is perfect, it means keeping the laws. That is what it's talking about. Perfect in love, or perfect obedience to the law. Because love, it tells us, if you love me, keep my commandments. Right? That's what it's talking about. So if you're afraid to keep trying after defeat, after defeat, after defeat, it's because you're not rooted in this truth. You're not. And Satan has basically conquered you. So you can't give up, man. Never give up. Never give up. Fuck that. Never give up. I'm going to swear for that one. Never ever give up. All right? Now let me go to the comments in this thing, because that's what I was going to do. Yeah, so I had commented before. You can see that there. War against the family unit. Nations are built on families, right? He's right on that. A bygone era of civility and self-respect. That's just absolute trash, because, you know, the lynchings were still going on during this time. Police brutality was, it was ridiculous during this time, right? So true, black people have been fed this gangster rap culture and fed insane role model by Hollywood and the record companies. And we know now that that was led by the CIA. Let's get that real quick. All right. I'm going to save this page real quick because it's a misread. All right. Okay. Okay, let's get this real quick. CIA introduced gangster rap. Alright. Well, I mean, it is true. Let's look at this one here. Before the CIA hijacked hip hop in one of the largest domestic psyops ever performed in American history, there was this. I am French and I read a book about it. I agree with you. Of course. I mean, it's not the largest one. The largest one was the crack cocaine epidemic. That was the biggest one, because that obliterated the black middle class. Obliterated overnight. Right? And what's his name? Fear and Loathing guy wrote about that. Hunter Thompson, as well as Hunter S. Thompson and what's his name again? The other guy. I forget his name. All right. How a hip hop conspiracy theory sheds light on the cracks in American justice. Former CIA agent admits agency created gangster rap to fill private prisons. There we go. This is the People's Voice. This was 2 years ago. John Holmeston, a retired CIA agent, admitted this week on national Russian television that the CIA was behind the creation of gangster rap in the late 80s and 90s to glamorize criminal behavior and fill private prisons. And, if you know anything about rap in the early parts, you had Public Enemy. Public Enemy was huge and was waking up so many people. But of course, they were, leaning more towards that Islam stuff and, Nation of Islam or whatnot. And the Heavenly Father not having that. So, of course, they were going to fail, right? He's not gonna support that. And then you had BDP, what's his name? Oh my God, man, that Benjamite brother. Not Chuck. What's his name? Let me look it up real quick on my laptop here. BDP. What is it? Sound of the Police guy. Whoop, whoop. That's the sound of the police. Whoop, whoop. That's the sound of the beast. What's his name? KRS-One. There we go. Yeah, KRS-One. You had a whole bunch of these, Poor Righteous Teachers. You had a lot of these really conscious groups out. And it was waking up too many people. It was making people, think of themselves differently. Couldn't have that. And all of a sudden, you had this push towards gangsterism, right? With the first one was NWA. That was the first one, and that was started by a known drug dealing piece of shit, Eazy-E. Peace be on the dead, but that's what he was in life. You know what I mean? And they were responsible for the crack epidemic, right? They pushed the crack epidemic, and how they did that, I did that in another video. They chose the weakest pieces of shit in the community, right? And armed them, gave them power. And you know what happens when you give power to a coward? You get tyranny, right? And they basically ran the community into the friggin' dirt. With their newfound power and protection, they killed the real men, right? They bred with the women, creating more pieces of garbage in the community. Eazy-E just happens to be one of them, right? They used him to push this. Well, why don't you sing about your lifestyle? Yeah, why don't you, talk about your life? And they recruited Ice Cube, Dr. Dre, etc. Right? And if you know anything about Dr. Dre, before he came into this thing, he was into that disco thing. He was disco glam, right? He was basically like that androgyny type thing. There are videos of it. Let me finish this and I'll find it. There's so much information, man. Sometimes my mouth can't keep up with my brain, and all this evidence I want to bring out and stuff. All right. Famous hip hop. The government spent big money, serious money, on the covert operation designed to further division and corrupt the American youth to nihilist, anti-establishment, anti-American ideologies, he explained in a half-hour interview. And the reason why they push nihilism and anti-establishment, anti-Americanism is because now the push is they're going to lump all these groups into one, right? That's what intersectionalism is all about. They're going to push the black, the brown, the gay, the queer, the trans. Everybody is being put in one big group, and then that group is going to be criminalized and wiped out. That's the next push. Okay? Famous hip-hop lyrics of the legendary hip-hop outfit NWA were even scripted by a team of psychologists and war propagandists inside the CIA. According to the former agent, fuck the police, and when I'm called off, I got a sawed off, squeeze the trigger, and bodies are hauled off, and other anti-established lyrics were intended to unleash a wave of cynicism towards authorities, promote the use of narcotics, and glamorize the gangster life in the minds of impressionable young people. And Remember I said this is layers. They had been slowly taking men out of the household well before this. So you had single mother households. What happens with single mother households? That's a vulnerable household. There is no man there to protect. There is no covering. So now they can come in with this gangsterism horse crap. The kids are looking up to these men who are, in their eyes, standing up to the oppression that they're facing. You see how it works? So now they're like, oh, okay, they're fighting this. They're fighting these people who took away my daddy. They're fighting these people who treat my mama bad. So I'm gonna be like them. You see how it works? You see how it works, and it affects not just it. This is the part where I said that they're lumping all of this into it. They're it affects black, brown, and poor whites. Every time I think about this, I remember the line in the movie with Matt Damon. What's it called? The Matt Damon and Robert De Niro movie. What's it called, man? It's the Good Shepherd. That's what it's called. The Good Shepherd. There's a scene in the movie where he's talking to Joe Pesci. Matt Damon is talking to Joe Pesci, and Joe Pesci's like, Italians, we got our families. The Jews, they got their religion. The even the niggas, they got their music. What do you people have? And Matt Damon is like, we have the United States of America. The rest of you are just passing through. Right? Just remember that. All right. All right. The CIA worked in tandem with the music industry, and the CIA has been heavily involved in Hollywood and that industry for decades before, because they were heavy in Hollywood, right? They were very, very heavy in the Hollywood scene, controlling the Hollywood narrative, especially during the war, to put out propaganda film, supporting the war in America's favor, of course. So that's not like anything new. Okay. What else? The CIA worked in tandem with the music industry to create a funnel in which young people would be indoctrinated and brainwashing gangster rap music, introduced to a life of crime, and then delivered to the highly profitable private prison system. In order to create this funnel, the CIA introduced music industry owners to the private prison industry. Once the funnel was in place, the system was a lock. All right. Some of the biggest names in the music industry are in cahoots with private prison owners. The gangster rap music that young people listen to is not only meant to entertain, but is designed to verbally and visually support criminal behavior that funnel young people into these private prisons. Wow. In 2021, Core Civic, formerly known as Corrections Corporations of America, the biggest name in the private prison industry, contacted 48 states offering to buy their prisons. There was one requirement of eligibility for the deal. I think this is where they said it has to be 190% occupancy. Was particularly strange. An assurance by the agency partner that the agency has sufficient inmate population to maintain a 90% occupancy rate over the term of the contract. So you're telling me that this is a prison. This is a prison, right? You won't go into the business with them unless the state can guarantee 90% occupancy. So you know what that means, right? Everything gets criminalized. It's just sweeping up people, especially more likely than normal is poor people, and you know who that entails: black and brown peoples mostly, right? Justification again to just sweep up a whole bunch of black people, just like with the Jim Crow laws, right? To sweep them all up into these private prisons, just like the war on drugs. Justification to go into black neighborhoods and decimate it, right? So it's very important that we educate ourselves on history of how this whole thing went down, because if not, then you'll have people like these, talking about how the bygone times were so great, right? It's about culture and moral values. Race is a different matter. Zionists and government destroy the black family. That's part of it. This just makes me sad. It could be like this if people woke up and wanted this. Simplistic and mindless post after simplistic and mindless post. I agree with that. Government doesn't want this, or government is out of a job. This is why they give freebies and infiltrate drugs into these neighborhoods. So there are some people who are seeing it, right? There we go. Another one. All right. So I just had to kind of like speak on this because, there's a whole program going on, right? A whole disinfo mission going on, kind of like glamorize the past like it was a great time, and it wasn't, right? None of it's gonna be a great time until we're delivered, all right, by Yahweh Shem Yahshai. Because it doesn't matter how much money you have in this society, you just make it up to second class citizenship, right? We are not free here. Why are we not free? All right, a free people. If you look at America during the time of the War of Revolution against the British, right? Their gripe was, we don't have representation. You tax us without representation. We have to obey your laws, and you're so far away, you don't know what's going on over here, etc. Right? So they fought a war revolution, and they're able to make their own government, create their own army to protect their interests at home and abroad, protect their borders, etc. Right? Fast forward, after the Civil War, we're talking about you're free, black man, you're free, right? Did that happen with us? Do we have our own government? Do we have our own military to protect our interests, protect our people at home and abroad? No. The dictates made by the descendants of our oppressors still have to be obeyed by the descendants of slaves. That's just the reality of it. We're still under them. Okay? All right. So with that, I'm going to say shalom to you all. Shabbat shalom, actually. Take care.